So just from some comments from friends on some of my past videos, and bringing up some concerns or just just general good comments. What he brought up was, and lots of people think that you can't look backwards. You can't change progress, etc., etc. And that's not what my mate said, though. He was just saying that there's a lot of work involved in producing more things, and absolutely. And basically, my response to him was, yes, you're correct, but I'm starting the conversation just so he could talk to his friends. I can talk to my friends. Other people all around the world could talk to someone they know, and then if it creates enough sparks, that could get experimenters or people who think and people who are into these sorts of things. It could, just start something. What if? Imagine that, because that's all I do. I just daydream about think about this stuff all of the time. And what I did say to me, mate, was the US Air Force, for quite a while, has been looking at a turboprop, potentially, or a light jet aircraft to facilitate, not replace the A-10 Warthog, which there's lots of videos on YouTube about a light attack aircraft. And it's not to replace the A-10 Warthog, it's to supplement it. And this is exactly what I'm saying. This is nothing to supplement our Air Force or saying that our Air Force should do this or should do that. It's not about that. It's about cost effectiveness and how we can supplement our Air Force and our defence systems on the cheap. Because as anybody in Australia knows, and look at the US war machine and military spending around the world, it is so absolutely expensive to buy latest models. There's of weaponry, aircraft, tanks, guns, etc., missiles. Now, there's always been, for hundreds of years or thousands of years, there's been the game of the sword and the shield. Okay, someone invents a really good sharp sword, and then someone builds some armor that stops that sword, and then it just keeps going on. Okay, so again, we're getting to a point now where it's too costly and too dangerous to send manned planes into airspaces that have got latest technology anti-aircraft systems. So, and like I said earlier, the day of dogfighting over occupied territories, it's over. The ground forces are too dangerous. The anti-aircraft stuff is too dangerous. So you put the technology, at the moment, we're putting the technology into drones and missile systems, etc., etc., and we're keeping the planes further back and the jets further back. Now, getting back to the US Air Force and its propeller or light support aircraft, ground support aircraft, or ground attack, they're looking at something, because in Afghanistan and Iraq, they were using F-16, F-18, B-52 bombers, etc., etc., Apache helicopters that are very, very, very expensive. The weapons they fire are very, very, very expensive. The operating costs and the logistics involved is so extraordinarily expensive that America is going into debt from being in such a long drawn out war, and they're shooting at guys with AK-47s, RPGs, roadside bombs, and if they're lucky they've got a Toyota Hilux or a Land Cruiser that's got a 20mm cannon on the back of it. Okay, and we've been throwing the best and the best of the best expensive military hardware at guys that are wearing rag sandals and carry an AK-47 and RPG. Okay, this is the madness of it. The military-industrial complex, they love it. The politicians love it. All of these people who profit from all of this, they don't care whether your son or daughter dies. They don't care how much the taxpayer is getting ripped off to pay for all of these wars and all of this expensive equipment. So that's where I'm coming from. So I want to get back to the planes because I know I got sidetracked. So what I ended up saying to one of my mates earlier was that there's already plans, and they're all over the internet now. There's photos, there's diagrams. We have field reports, we have data, how these performed in the field, in combat, whether they were good bomb trucks, whether they fatigued under high stress maneuvers, etc., etc. All of that's there. We have physical hard copies of these in museums, war museums, aircraft museums, etc. So these can be reverse engineered. We have all the horsepower ratings of the old engines, and we have new engines now. We can see what a turbo does. We can see size and weight and fuel characteristics, so we know how we can make them bigger, we can make them smaller. Same with the weapon systems. You know, most of these planes here use cannons and machine guns. Okay, I don't see really much of a point for cannons and machine guns in this theatre, this modern theatre. You know, where it's all going to be drones and missiles and lasers and things like that. We need to keep these things way back. These are just platforms to project, to cover a certain amount of distance, but still keep them at a safe distance when they release their weapons, and then they can turn around and hit the deck, come in low at their maximum speed to get out of the danger zone. You know, to avoid the adversary's standoff capabilities. So, and the dumber you keep things, yes, they may not be as potentially accurate as other things, but at least they can't be jammed. You know, so, and again, like I keep saying, you can use swarm tactics, whether it's drones, whether it's missiles, whether it's ballistic missiles or lasers or whatever. You send up decoys, which could just be dumb, still weapons, but they're just dumb ones, and then periodic, proper guided ones to overwhelm enemy defenses. Okay, so what else can I say? If you can have float planes, if you're operating overseas and you've got float planes and they're small, if they're small, if you can take off and land on water, or you can have small, lightweight propeller, especially propeller vehicles. The reasons why I like these, and ballistic missiles, why I like ballistic missiles and basic aircraft, is you don't need massive airports. You don't need all of the infrastructure that goes with building tarmacs and runways and hangars and all sorts of stuff to house massively expensive planes and support facilities. What if they're what if they get attacked by huge volleys of missiles, whether they're nuclear, whether they're EMP, whether they're biological or, you know, conventional weapons? It doesn't matter. If you've got all of your eggs in one basket, a massively expensive Air Force field and base, and it gets hit by a nuke, you lose all of the planes, you lose all of the personnel and all of that infrastructure. That's all gone. If these things can take off, if they're very basic, they're propeller driven, piston engine, you don't have birds and other debris getting sucked into turbines, which are very expensive, and because they spin so fast at such high RPM, they will be damaged by dust, debris, animals, birds, etc., etc. Where a propeller engine is, a piston engine is much more forgiving for those sorts of things, and they're far, far cheaper to build. The components can be built all over the place and assembled in wherever. The fuels are basic, you know. You just got to keep the octane rating up, and you can run boost into them. Job done. Turbines use so much more fuel than a piston engine. So again, the physical plane can be smaller. The physical missile could be smaller. Again, that's why I mentioned pulse jets as well. You know, no moving parts. They're very basic. They're basically like an exhaust system for a two-stroke motorbike. If you can build that on a larger scale, you've got a pulse jet engine. Okay, it's really basic. And they don't need, the infrastructure of massive airports. You don't need huge, big, long runways, because you're taking off with a lightweight plane. You're taking off with lightweight weaponry. You don't need machine guns in here. So this, for instance, this plane here had 4 machine guns, 303 machine guns in the nose. Then under the chin had 4 20mm cannons. They're massive and heavy, and the ammunition is massive and heavy. We can take those completely out because we don't need machine guns anymore. Okay, so we're saving even more weight and space there. That can be filled up with aviation equipment, communications equipment, you know, more fuel, bigger weapons bays, etc., etc. So these could carry, you know, longer, more deadly missiles. You know, you look at the fairy swordfish that crippled the Bismarck. It was basically a World War I technology plane that carried a torpedo of around 700 kilos. The plane travelled so slow that it was basically suicidal to attack something like the Bismarck. But in the end, it hit its Achilles heel, and it hit one of the biggest and most technically advanced battleships and crippled it, you know, with very crude 20-year-old technology. So it just goes to show that, you know, what can be done. And, you know, getting back to the US Air Force, you know, this is a OV-10A Bronco. When they were looking at evaluating turboprop planes for cheaper flight hours, maintenance, and cheaper ground attack and suppressive fire against lightly armed enemy, you know, this was something that they looked at. It's been mothballed for ages. The Philippines Air Force, they were using them. Not sure if they're still using them. But twin engine, lightweight plane, but it was multi-role. You know, it had many uses. It was designed to take off from unprepared runways, and that's another thing that I keep touching on. Unprepared runways. You know, they could be kept in safety in peacetime. They could be used for lots of different purposes, multi-role. But then when they need to, they could be flown to our ally neighbours' places and things like that, and they don't need special. They could land on beaches. They could land on very, very basic airstrips, and they can take off and be serviced in the field. If you've got float planes, they can take off and land on rivers and in shallow, calm water. You know, we've got plenty of shallow, calm water around this country, protected by islands and protected by coves and bays and things like that. Same with all of we've got a whole archipelago here of where these things could be hiding. They could land in a bay, and then they could cruise up a saltwater creek and, you know, be camped up in mangroves. And then they come out, take off, do their duty, whether it's reconnaissance, whether it's supplying ships at sea, whether it's picking up wounded, whether it's supplying little submarines like I keep talking about, you know. Make them a system. Make them so this plane works with this one, and they work with float planes, and then they also work with the Navy, you know, to resupply, pick up special forces, drop off stuff to special forces, you know, evacuate wounded, you know, drop off supplies, so you can make a forward base, whether it's for special forces, whether it's for a small naval submarine force, whether it's for a forward air base, you know, make them their own independent little ecosystems. Very cheap, very light. All they got to do is get from here to here in a straight line, instead of driving on the ground, instead of needing helicopters, which are very expensive and very require a lot of maintenance, etc., etc. These things are the next best thing. They're faster. These are perfect for hunting helicopters as well. Have them so that they can hunt helicopters that are searching for submarines, etc., etc. And then, you know, if we make them and we perfect them, we can lend lease them. We can sell them to our neighbours who don't have very expensive air forces. We could, you know, we could subsidise them, you know, and then that way we're giving our neighbours who don't have a lot of financial stuff, if they're on board and they're letting us use their airspaces and their seas, and they're using their eyes and ears for reconnaissance and on patrol for us, it's just win-win-win, you know. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense.